Your soulmate is desperate to see you, the call is about to ring. My beloved child. Your soulmate is desperate to see you, and the call you have secretly wondered about may be much closer than you realize. Something happened recently that changed the way they have been handling their feelings for you. Until now, they kept convincing themselves that silence was safer. They tried staying busy. They tried ignoring the urge to reach out. They even rehearsed conversations with you in their mind, only to stop themselves before touching the call button. But now that restraint is beginning to disappear. There is one specific reason they suddenly feel they cannot wait much longer, and strangely, it began with something that reminded them of you when they least expected it. The moment hit harder than they were prepared for. Their first thought was not simply, "I miss them." It was something much more urgent, "I need to see them." But why did that realization frighten them enough to hesitate again? What you don't know is that your soulmate has already imagined exactly what they want to say when you answer. They have gone over the first few words repeatedly, changing them because nothing seems strong enough to explain what has been happening inside them. There is also a question they desperately want to ask you, but they are afraid your answer could completely change what happens between you next. Would you recognize the emotion in their voice immediately? Would you understand why they suddenly need to see you face to face instead of continuing this distance? Don't skip, because their hesitation is not coming from a lack of feeling. It is coming from the opposite. They know that once this conversation begins, something they have carefully hidden could finally come into the open. And there is another detail making this moment even more intense. Someone recently said something to them about you that they have been unable to forget. That conversation planted a thought your soulmate could no longer push aside. At first, they dismissed it. Then they went quiet. Later, when they were alone, they replayed those words and realized there might be something about your connection they had misunderstood all along. Suddenly, memories they had been trying to bury started returning. The way you made them feel understood, the things left unsaid between you, and one moment they now wish they had handled differently. Their desire to see you is no longer just about missing your presence. They believe meeting you could answer a question that has been following them for longer than you know. Something huge is waiting for you, because before they make that meeting happen, they have to do one thing they have been afraid to do: make the call. Their hand has already come close to the phone more than once, but there is one final truth they need the courage to tell you when you answer. And that truth explains why seeing you suddenly feels so urgent. That final truth has been sitting behind their silence for longer than you would ever guess. Your soulmate has realized that waiting is no longer protecting either of you, it is only making the distance harder to carry. Recently, they caught themselves imagining what would happen if they actually heard your voice again. Would everything they planned to say disappear the second you answered? Would you sound surprised, guarded, or quietly relieved? Those questions have kept them frozen. But something has changed. They are no longer asking themselves whether they should contact you. They are thinking about when. And that difference matters, because they have already pictured the moment after the call. The possibility of standing in front of you, looking into your eyes, and finally saying what could never be explained through a screen. Yet there is one sentence they are terrified you might say before they get that chance. Your soulmate fears you may have started believing their silence meant they stopped caring. That possibility has shaken them more deeply than they expected. They know how their distance may have looked from your side. They know you could have questioned whether the connection mattered as much to them as it did to you. But behind that silence, something very different was happening. They were fighting themselves. Every time they considered reaching out, another fear appeared. What if too much time had passed? What if you had emotionally closed the door? What if hearing your voice made every feeling they had tried to control become impossible to hide? Stay with this, because those fears are now losing their power. Your soulmate recently came to a realization that changed everything. They would rather risk hearing an uncomfortable truth from you than continue wondering what might have happened if they had simply called. And now the moment is becoming real. They have been thinking about where they could meet you, what they would say first, and even how they would explain why they waited this long. But there is one thing they have not prepared for: your reaction when they reveal what triggered this sudden urgency. It was not loneliness alone. It was not jealousy. Something specific made them realize that another opportunity to see you should never be taken for granted. That realization brought one memory rushing back, and with it came a decision they can no longer comfortably reverse. The next time your name crosses their mind, they may not push the feeling away. They may reach for the phone. And when that call finally comes, listen carefully to the first few seconds, because your soulmate has chosen a very particular reason to give you for wanting to see you, and it is not the reason you are expecting. The reason they have chosen begins with a moment they have told almost no one about. Your soulmate recently found themselves in a familiar place, surrounded by ordinary sounds and people, when something unexpectedly brought your memory rushing back. For a few seconds, they stopped paying attention to everything around them. They remembered your expression during a conversation that once seemed insignificant, and suddenly understood what you had been trying to communicate without saying it directly. That realization stayed with them. Later that night, they reached for their phone, found your name, and stared at it longer than they intended. Their heart was telling them to call. Their fear was telling them to wait. But this time another thought appeared: what if waiting is exactly how I lose the chance to make this right? That question has changed the entire situation. There is something else you need to know. Your soulmate does not simply want another casual conversation. They want to see you because there is something they believe can only be understood when you are standing face to face. They want to watch your reaction when they finally explain what their silence really meant. They want to know whether the connection they still feel becomes undeniable when you are in the same room again. And beneath all of that is one question they cannot answer alone: do you still feel it too? Don't skip, because this is where their desperation becomes deeper. They have begun noticing how many decisions they made out of fear instead of honesty. They held back when they wanted to move closer. They stayed quiet when they wanted to speak. And now they are realizing that protecting themselves may have cost them precious time with you. That realization is why the call feels different now. Your soulmate has mentally crossed a line they kept refusing to cross before. They are no longer planning an imaginary conversation that disappears by morning. They have started thinking about the actual words they will use. They may begin carefully, almost casually, because they do not want you to hear how nervous they are. But beneath those first words will be a much bigger intention. They want to ask whether they can see you. Not someday. Not in some vague future. Soon. And there is a reason they suddenly feel time matters. Someone close to them unknowingly asked a simple question about you, and your soulmate could not give the answer they expected. Instead, they went completely quiet, because that question exposed something they had been hiding even from themselves. And what they realized in that silence may be the real reason your phone is about to ring. The question was painfully simple: if you still care this much, why haven't you called? Your soulmate had no convincing answer. For the first time, every excuse they had been using sounded weak even to them. Being busy was not the real reason. Waiting for the perfect moment was not the real reason. Even fear could no longer explain everything. The deeper truth was that calling you would force them to face feelings they had carefully kept under control. Hearing your voice could make those feelings real again. Seeing you afterward could make them impossible to deny. But as they sat with that question, another realization struck them even harder: avoiding you had never made the connection disappear. It had only created more unanswered questions. And one of those questions has now become impossible for them to ignore. What if you have been waiting for the same conversation? Since that moment, your soulmate has started paying attention to things they once pushed aside. Certain memories feel sharper. Certain words you said suddenly carry a different meaning. Even the silence between you no longer feels empty to them, it feels unfinished. They keep returning to one particular memory involving the last time they wanted to tell you something important but chose not to. They remember almost calling you afterward. They remember imagining how differently everything might have unfolded if they had followed that instinct. Now that regret is turning into determination. Something huge is waiting for you, because they are not only preparing to ask to see you, they are preparing to admit why they need that meeting. And the answer involves a feeling they thought they could eventually outgrow, yet somehow it has become stronger with distance. What makes this even more intense is that your soulmate has begun rehearsing the exact moment the call connects. They imagine hearing you say hello. They imagine that brief silence when both of you realize who is on the other end. They know they could lose their courage if they wait too long, so they have chosen a simple opening before revealing anything deeper. But there is something you cannot see from your side. Before pressing that button, they intend to look at one particular reminder of you. It could be something you once said, something connected to a shared memory, or something they kept because they could never bring themselves to let it go. That reminder has become their final push. And when they looked at it recently, they noticed something they had somehow overlooked before. Something that made them whisper a decision to themselves that may soon become the first real step towards seeing you again. That decision was simple, but it carried everything they had been afraid to admit. They cannot keep pretending they are okay with never knowing what could happen between you. Your soulmate has spent too much time imagining possibilities instead of discovering the truth. And now, every time they look at that reminder of you, one thought becomes stronger. Seeing you again might answer what distance never could. They remember details about you they thought time would soften. The sound of your voice. The way certain conversations with you stayed in their mind long after they ended. Even the moments when neither of you knew exactly what to say. Why would those memories still feel so alive if they meant nothing? That question has become impossible for them to dismiss. And because of it, your soulmate has made another quiet decision. When they call, they will not hide behind meaningless small talk for long. There is a confession waiting underneath that first conversation. Not some dramatic speech they memorized perfectly, but something far more vulnerable. Your soulmate wants you to know that there were moments when they almost reached out and stopped themselves at the final second. They want to explain why. They also want to admit that the distance affected them differently than they allowed anyone to see. But there is one thing they still do not know how to tell you: the moment they realized they were genuinely afraid of losing access to your life completely. That realization did not come when they were alone thinking about you. It came during an unexpected conversation when someone casually suggested that you might eventually move forward without them. Your soulmate tried to appear unaffected, but inside, something immediately resisted that possibility. Don't skip, because what they did afterward revealed just how deeply those words reached them. Later, when no one was watching, your soulmate checked their phone again. Your name was still there. The possibility of calling was still there. But this time, they did something different. Instead of closing the screen immediately, they began forming the question they actually wanted to ask you. Can I see you? For ordinary words, yet saying them would expose everything they have been trying to conceal. Because if you say yes, they know the meeting cannot remain casual for very long. There is too much unfinished emotion between you. Too many things they have rehearsed privately. Too many questions they need answered by looking directly at you. But before they ask to meet, they have decided to reveal one detail about the past, something they never told you when it happened. And that hidden detail explains why they almost called you much earlier, why they stopped themselves, and why this time they may finally refuse to hang up until you hear the truth. That hidden detail goes back to a night when your soulmate came closer to calling you than you ever knew. Your name was already on the screen. Their finger hovered over the button, and for one brief moment, they had decided they were done hiding. But just before they made the call, they remembered something you had once said about protecting your peace, and fear twisted those words into a warning. They convinced themselves that contacting you might disturb a life you had already begun rebuilding. So they put the phone down. What they never expected was the regret that followed. Instead of feeling relieved, they spent the rest of that night wondering whether they had misunderstood you completely. Were you really asking for distance, or had they used your words as permission to avoid their own vulnerability? That question never left them, and now they believe they finally know the answer. Something happened afterward that made their old interpretation harder to believe. Your soulmate heard a small detail about you, nothing dramatic on the surface, but enough to make them realize you may have carried unanswered feelings of your own. Suddenly, that night with the unanswered call looked completely different. They began wondering whether both of you had been waiting for the other person to make the first move. Imagine what that realization did to them. All this time, they had believed silence was preventing disappointment, when silence itself may have been creating it. Stay with this, because that is why their desire to see you has become so urgent. They do not want another month, another week, or another meaningful moment to disappear because neither of you said what needed to be said. Yet there is still one uncertainty stopping their finger every time they reach for your number: they have no idea how you will respond when you hear their voice. But your soulmate has prepared themselves for that uncertainty in a way they never did before. They are no longer expecting the conversation to be perfect. If your voice sounds guarded, they intend to stay calm. If you ask why they are suddenly calling, they intend to answer instead of avoiding the question. And if there is silence between you, they have promised themselves they will not panic and disappear again. Because beneath their nervousness is something stronger now, a need to know whether seeing each other could change what both of you have been carrying separately. They have even pictured the exact second they will finally ask, "Can we meet?" But there is another sentence they plan to say immediately afterward, and this is the sentence that changes the meaning of the entire call. They do not simply want to see you because they miss you. They need to see you because they recently discovered something about their own feelings that they can no longer explain away, and once you hear what it is, you may finally understand why they waited until now. What they discovered is that missing you was never the real problem. The real problem was what happened whenever they imagined never seeing you again. Your soulmate expected time to make that possibility easier, but it did the opposite. One ordinary evening, they allowed themselves to picture a future in which your paths simply never crossed again. No conversation. No chance to explain. No moment where they could look at you and finally discover whether everything between you had truly disappeared. The thought unsettled them immediately. And that reaction exposed something they could no longer deny. They were not holding on to a memory, they were holding on to an unfinished connection. That distinction changed everything. Suddenly, calling you no longer felt like reopening the past. It felt like preventing one unanswered question from following them indefinitely. But then another thought hit them. What if you answer and immediately recognize exactly why they are calling? That possibility makes them nervous because your soulmate knows their voice may reveal more than their words. They can prepare sentences, control what they say, and pretend the conversation is casual, but they cannot guarantee you will not hear the emotion underneath it. You may notice the pause after they say your name. You may hear their breathing change before they ask whether you have a minute. And when they finally tell you they want to see you, there could be another silence, one they have imagined dozens of times. What will you say? Will you ask why now? Will you remind them how long they waited? Or will you quietly admit that you wondered when this call would finally come? Your soulmate has considered every possibility, yet one response frightens them more than rejection itself. Hearing that you once wanted this too, but eventually stopped waiting. That possibility is exactly why they no longer want to delay. And there is now another reason the call feels dangerously close. Your soulmate recently made a small preparation they had never made during their previous almost calls. They cleared time. They thought about where they could meet you without distractions. They even imagined what they would wear, then caught themselves and realized how real this had become. Don't skip, because this is no longer only an emotional impulse passing through their mind. They are mentally preparing for an actual encounter. Yet before they ask you to meet, they want to test one thing during the first few seconds of the call. They want to hear whether your voice changes when you realize it is them. They believe that tiny reaction could tell them something words might hide. And if they hear what they are secretly hoping to hear, they have already decided they will tell you something they once swore they would keep to themselves, a confession connected to the last time they saw you that could explain why they never truly managed to let that moment go.